If you've been watching the news at all this year, I'm sure you've heard of the town Flint, Michigan. The water in Flint is contaminated with toxic chemicals like lead. But Flint is being affected by more than just faulty pipes. To understand what's really going on, we need to have a conversation about environmental racism.
The environment can't be racist.
Of course it's not. But the allocation of resources on the planet has almost always been decided by those in power. In the United States, for over 200 years, those in power were white.
Oh, don't make it about race.
We can't make it about race, because it already is. Studies have shown that a community's average skin color is the best indicator of whether or not a toxic waste site will be put in their neighborhood. While socioeconomic status, social class, can and does play into discrimination of this sort, generally, it is people of color that bear the brunt of man-made environmental dangers. This is environmental racism, defined by Bullard as any environmental policy, practice, or directive that differentially affects or disadvantages, whether intended or unintended, individuals, groups, or communities based on race or color. Environmental racism isn't a term most people are familiar with, but it is certainly an act that we have all witnessed. To give you an example, let's consider New Orleans in 2005. In 2000, prior to Hurricane Katrina, there were approximately 14,000 people living in the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans. This particular neighborhood's population was made up of 98.3% Black or African American individuals.
Why do those numbers matter?
Statistics show that storms' impacts often weigh more heavily upon racial minorities and the poor. This was especially true in the 9th Ward. Not only were these groups affected by the storm at a higher rate than their white counterparts, but Riley Morse's study showed that the recovery of socially and economically vulnerable storm victims continues to lag behind mainstream society. So how did this happen? Some research blamed the disproportionate impacts of Hurricane Katrina on settlement patterns. Morse explained that over the course of many years, racial segregation in this region established patterns of settlement for many African Americans in less desirable, flood-prone areas. The factors that put the largely Black community of the 9th Ward in danger were decided long before Hurricane Katrina was ever on the radar. But not everything can be blamed on history. Policymakers at the time made specific decisions not to fix levees that were in desperate need of repair. The levees that most needed attention were those protecting the 9th Ward, and so the devastation faced by all of its inhabitants was entirely preventable.
But that was just one time.
No, it's just an obvious example. Environmental racism also runs rampant in Flint, Michigan. The population of Flint is 57% Black. And it is this portion of the population that is most directly affected by the water crisis. The trouble in Flint started around April 2014 and is still going on. The water in Flint is not being treated correctly and contains dangerously high levels of lead. Because of this, the water is undrinkable and unsafe. However, the residents in Flint have no other options than to use the contaminated water, and no other option but to continue to pay for the contaminated water. Much like Hurricane Katrina and other instances of environmental racism, the cause of this crisis cannot be traced back to a single decision by a particular individual. But the effects are very real and are felt most acutely by communities of color in Flint due to a poorly managed response.
Well, if we don't know whose fault it is, then who's supposed to fix it?
Bullard would tell us, everyone. He explains that the answer to environmental racism is environmental justice, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Environmental racism is able to continue because, when no clear culprit is identifiable, the nation is content to leave the responsibility of repairing damage to the people that have been affected. When the rest of our communities are willing to take notice of those among us that are struggling, and, even more importantly, willing to demand justice for those people, environmental racism stops in its tracks. To Flint, Michigan, we see you, we hear you. It's our turn to step up. If you're interested in helping respond to the crisis in Flint, here are some reputable charities to reach out to. Help prevent further tragedies caused by environmental racism. Keep your eyes open and pay attention to lawmakers. Speak out when you see injustice. Together, we can end this.